Well, welcome to Wake Up Well for Holy Week at the Well Sheffield. Today is Tuesday and I'm reading from Matthew 21 verses 18 to 23. In the morning, as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, he was hungry and he noticed a fig tree beside the road. He went over to see if there were any figs, but there were only leaves. And then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the fig tree withered up. The disciples were amazed when they saw this, and they asked, "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" Then Jesus told them, "I tell you the truth. If you have faith and don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. You can even say to this mountain, 'May you be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' and it will happen. You can pray for anything, and if you have faith, you will receive it." Then Jesus returned to the temple and began teaching. The leading priests and elders came up to him. They demanded, "By what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you the right?" That's maybe a curious passage for us to think about during Holy Week. The message of Holy Week is this: judgment is coming and salvation from sin is coming. And so we must align our hearts, our kind of inner response, in order that our outer actions align with that truth, that reality. So Jesus, sometimes it's called cursing the fig tree. It doesn't actually say that in our version, does it? But he speaks out words over it. It's something of a puzzle. I think it's supposed to be a parable lived out in front of the disciples in a very public way, in such a way that actually that they remembered it, and years later they still recount what happened. So what's going on here? Well, Jesus is hungry and he sees a fig tree, and he sees that because it has leaves on the fig tree, he expects that it should also have fruit. Only when he gets to it, he finds that the tree has no fruit, and that's when he speaks out against it. And that feels really strong, doesn't it? We think, "Oh no, poor fig tree, what's the fig tree ever done to me to deserve this kind of treatment?" But actually in the Old Testament scriptures, the fig tree itself was a symbol of the people of Israel, the God's people. And so Jesus is sending a message, he sends it to his disciples, about the connection between not bearing fruit and having Jesus speak against you, being cursed as it were. He expected the tree to have fruit, but it did not. It only appeared to have fruit. Why? Why is this tree not bearing fruit? Well, let's think about the context here. The Jewish people, a couple of days earlier, had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem by shouting, "Hosanna, here comes this person coming in the name of the Lord." They recognized that Jesus was the promised Messiah, so it wasn't the Jewish people who weren't bearing fruit. However, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, the scribes, they saw the same things happen with Jesus. They listened to what people described as wonderful teaching, but they responded with indignation. They questioned Jesus' authority to speak and teach and authority to tell the people about God. So the fig tree in this story is described as having many leaves but no fruit. And that is a metaphor for those religious leaders of the time. They outwardly appeared pious, they went through the motions, but inwardly they were barren. They lacked genuine fruit and genuine good works in Jesus' eyes. And, even the day before this in Holy Week, Jesus had walked into the temple and had kind of cursed it in the same way, had spoken out against its corruption. So here's the religious centre, the epicenter of the Jewish faith, the temple in Jerusalem. But inside it were money changers, and Jesus had gone in and he'd thrown over the tables, and he had kind of come against the hypocrisy of the Jewish people. The priests were allowing it to happen. They were allowing people to make money, and people themselves were trading and on sacrifice. They were allowing sacrifices to become a commodity. In other words, they were mocking the kind of inner devotion that God actually requires of us. So Holy Week has a message that judgment is coming and that sin is going to be dealt with. Salvation for sin is coming, and that we need to align our hearts in response and live in response to that truth. And that's a tightrope, and we have to take that tightrope very seriously. Jesus has the right to judge our hearts, what's really going on and our inner motivations. He has the right. And Jesus can free us from our sinful selves. He can reform us, rehabit us, our behaviours, into fruitful kingdom lives. It's both. Jesus says when you are genuine, then you will have both faithfulness and fruitfulness. That's a great promise to hold on to. But we should also recognise we should have ringing in our ears what Jesus says he doesn't like, the kind of way he calls out the religious leaders. He says, what comes out of your mouth has to reflect what's in your heart. It's always circumcision of the heart. It's always devotion of the heart, actually, that Jesus is looking for, because that's where the fruit comes from. But don't be intimidated, don't be afraid by that, because the next thing, the last thing that Jesus says in this account in Matthew is he says to the disciples, you and us today who are following Jesus, you will have faith without doubting. You will be able to do these miraculous things in future as we pray in faith to God. So we're not to be intimidated, but we are to be woken up. And this is Holy Week. We take ourselves and our inner life seriously. God doesn't like hypocrisy. What he requires is faithfulness, which leads to fruitfulness. But as we love God, as we align our actions with our heart's desires, fruitfulness will come. And instead of being cursed, we will be blessed, and we will see the miraculous life of God's kingdom coming in our lives as well. So with that thought for today, I bless you this Holy Week.